and the microphone is live. So, all right, we're back. It's our 11 o'clock time frame for presentation from Ozark Center. I will let these folks introduce themselves, so all yours.
I am Debbie Fitzgerald. I am the director of Ozark Center Crisis Services.
And my name is Stephen McCullough, and I'm the assistant director for Ozark Center Crisis Services.
We realize it's probably not the most popular topic to discuss, behavioral health, but we're going to tie it in a little bit with trauma, because what we know about first responders in general, it's very common to what we experience at the crisis center at Ozark Center. So we're going to give you tips when you're actually out in the field and things that you can take home and try for yourself. So when we talk about behavioral health, it used to be called psychiatric care, then it was called mental health. Now they refer to it as behavioral health. It is a broad umbrella term. It refers to a person's emotions, their behaviors, and their overall well-being, because the mind and the body are connected. It includes mental health and substance use disorders, life stressors, and it also includes stress-related physical symptoms. Very often people present to an emergency room or to a primary care with a lot of vague complaints about stomach aches, diarrhea, constipation, headaches. Yes, there are things that people may have that have gone undetected or undiagnosed, but often we're not doing depression screenings or checking for, is there a diagnosable or treatable behavioral health condition. I am sad to tell you that 1 in 4 Americans experience a diagnosable behavioral health disorder in any given year, in any 12-month period. And if you think about that, Stephen and I work with 60 staff. The odds are we have staff on our own team that may be experiencing a behavioral health disorder. You may be asking, or you may not, but hopefully we can give you some information that may be helpful to you as you do your job. The most common conditions are anxiety and depression. Those are prevalent and prominent in our American way of life, and the ages are getting younger. Bipolar disorder, which used to be called manic depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. That gets thrown around a lot, and there are some misconceptions, but hopefully we'll be able to clear any of those up. Schizophrenia and eating disorders, particularly young females that have eating disorders. Alcohol use disorder and behavioral addictions. And those can be addictions to electronics, to gambling, to substances, to self-injury, but we'll talk about those more as we go along.
All right, so what does depression look like? It is a prolonged period of sadness, tearful. Sometimes they're agitated. They don't feel like they have a lot of interest. They start pulling away from things that they used to enjoy doing. They let things go. They just don't have a lot of desire to really do the things that they used to do. They find it to be a struggle to do day-to-day tasks. Depression interferes with the ability to complete those job tasks and interferes with productivity most of the time, is what we're seeing. We see that in the job force, reported about 20% of the time, but estimates are that it could be higher. We also have the problem where we can't remember quite as well when we are depressed. A lot of times we have a tendency to not perform cognitively, where our brain is just kind of slowed down, and we usually see that about 35% of the time. With anxiety, we're talking about people that are feeling worrisome. They are trembling, they're sweating, they're really restless. Sometimes there is an agitated anxiety where they're irritable. They appear very tense, and you get too close and they snap and they start maybe start yelling a little bit. And then, of course, is the precursor to a full-on panic attack where they feel like they can't breathe, the walls are closing in on them, that they're not able to function, and they lose all sense of control. Depression and anxiety are two of the top 3 conditions for disability in the United States after pain management or pain-related issues. So we see this a lot, particularly in people that are on disability, that they struggle with that.
And so I would encourage you at some point to look at some scans that they've done of a person who is suffering from an extreme, significant, severe clinical depression, and then what the normal brain looks like if you just sometime Google it or look it up online. So sometimes I'll actually show people on my computer screen, let's make a decision when your brain looks like this one with the lights turned on, not this one where it's dim. Because we're making life and death decisions in a moment where your brain's not functioning fully 100%. So for me, working in crisis services is my favorite part of working in mental health. I've worked in mental health since May of 1983, and I love crisis work because I never know what kind of day I'm gonna have, which is similar to what many of you have. You don't know if it's going to be a child, a youth, a middle-aged adult, a senior citizen. I like the spontaneity of it, but I also realize that our types of jobs come with some unique factors that are special to that kind of work. But what does bipolar disorder look like? People will have more periods of depression than they do the mania. The mania is the part where they're very upbeat. They're distractible. Sometimes they'll go on spending sprees. They can talk very quickly. They can disrobe. There's something about mania and bipolar disorder. I think I've seen more nakedness in my mental health career for people that are experiencing a manic episode than I have any other disorder. And they're usually mortified at a later date that it was like that. And then when they're really down, which typically you'll have, 2 to 3 depressive episodes, usually possibly 1 mania. And it doesn't necessarily have to be full-blown mania. It can be to a lower level. But people can feel sad, hopeless. They can start having delusions and hallucinations, which is very scary for someone who's been functioning. It's not common in the family. Nobody's been diagnosed with it, and nobody really has any language for it. It can be very scary for people that start to slip down on the depressive side of a bipolar episode and actually start having delusions, false beliefs, and hallucinations, which can be olfactory, you smell them, tactile, you feel them, auditory, you're hearing voices, visual, you're seeing things. I forgot the one for taste, but.
Yeah, and that can also happen when they're in that manic episode, when they're being very impulsive. A lot of people will seek out, go to primary care, seek out help for depression. And depending on the antidepressants that they're given, it could induce the manic episode within the bipolar disorder itself. So it's very important for them to get correctly diagnosed and on the right medication.
And not everybody has bipolar disorder, and people that have depression, we're going to talk to you about some ways to combat it if you believe that you or someone you work with or someone you care for and maybe having some mild depression, some ways to help heal the body that do not require behavioral health care. And usually before someone has post-traumatic stress disorder, it's usually acute stress disorder. It is reliving a traumatic event, and it's unwanted. It's not you're talking about it with the people that co-responded or your minister or your best friend or your boss, and its intrusive, reoccurring memories can be nightmares. I know I myself have experienced throughout my career an acute stress episode that did not progress to PTSD because luckily I had a safety net around me to say you have to address this. Exaggerated startle response. If you're the person when a motorcycle backfires or there's a loud noise, somebody drops something, there's a big bang, and if you're the one that really overly reacts and drops your items you're holding, that is an exaggerated startle response. We also find that sometimes people will start to increase substance use, and that doesn't necessarily have to be illegal drugs. It can be alcohol, it can be vaping, it can be smoking, it can be taking, if you're prescribed PRN medication for sleep because you work erratic hours, that you suddenly begin taking it every night. Sometimes people will have memory issues, but usually sleep is impacted and people start to become pretty irritable. I know Stephen and I do a lot of crisis debriefings and have done them over our careers, and sometimes finding out about what people in the emergency room and first responders have experienced in industrial accidents that have resulted in death. Obviously, we hear those as well as help people that come to the crisis center, so we are familiar with how to help.
And I think it's important to mention that people that go through a traumatic experience don't always go on to develop PTSD.
No.
Sometimes it can be just acute and they get the help they need, and then things are not a problem moving forward because they take care of themselves and they work through things. So when we're talking about schizophrenia, we're talking more about a thought disorder. This is a person that may have delusions, which are beliefs that are a little off-guarded. They may think that they control the weather. They may think that they are the mother of the 12 tribes of Israel, which is one of the ones that I have seen. They have sometimes auditory hallucinations. They tend to have social withdrawal. They do pick up on the fact that they're a little different. They get very suspicious of people. Sometimes they get very paranoid about what people may be wanting to think, are thinking about them or wanting to do. They act in odd ways, show little emotion. Sometimes we call that, that they're flat or they're blunted in their emotional affect because they don't have that large range, being able to be really sad or very happy, and then have trouble thinking clearly.
So one thing when I've mentioned to people is think, and I hate to even mention his name, but Charles Manson, like that wide-eyed stare that he has when he just has that look on his face. Sometimes you'll see people that have that. One of my favorites was a gentleman that had schizophrenia that was in treatment for many years at Ozark Center. So he would become ill every few years and he would run through the crisis team. He decided I was the best crisis counselor ever, so he wrote a check on the Bank of God and gave it to the company president asking to give me $1 million. Of course, I did not get the million, but it was the thought that counts. But sometimes you just don't know. Most of the time, you may have a previous episode with the individual. They may be homeless because sometimes they choose not to take the long-acting antipsychotics, which are, by the way, the new line of them are life-changing and miracles for individuals. And if you have to trust someone to take an oral pill, they're not likely with schizophrenia to take it. Eating disorders. So people can restrict eating or they'll avoid foods, they can binge, they can purge, use laxatives, or do a combination of all of the above, and then compulsive exercise. Be particularly concerned about a young female who is displaying all of those and is not really stable. I remember a young female one time that drank Drano because she had so trained herself like an athlete trains. She had dampened down that innate ability for her body to want to survive, and she actually drank a large bottle of Drano and did not survive it. Very tragic. But people can gain weight, lose weight, still have that body image. Sometimes you'll see people hoarding food, and sometimes they won't eat in front of others. Alcohol use disorder, very, very common. Lack of control or to stay away. Somebody may drink 2 beers after work, and then it becomes 3, and then it's 6, and then it's 12. And it works for a short period of time, and I am not going to be holier than thou. However, my checkpoint is my husband. If I come home, he can tell, he says, by the way I put my purse down, what kind of day I've had. And if I go immediately, not gonna lie, for a Michelob Ultra, 1 down and he's good with it, if I go back for another, he'll say that's really not a good coping skill. To which I usually say, well, who died and appointed you to be my boss? And I'm a counselor and I've got this. But it is a good check for me, because sometimes I've never suffered from alcohol use disorder, but I do think that I would use it more if my husband would not occasionally point out, looks like you've had a rough day, it's probably not the best coping. Sometimes people will ignore the risk factors. They're vomiting blood, they're not eating, they're buying, the cheapest vodka instead of getting food. And they start missing obligations. They don't pay bills, they don't show up to work, they show up to work late. And higher and higher dose to get the same pleasurable effect over time.
All right. So we were talking about mental health. We also want to talk about suicide prevention and why it's important. Excuse me, for first responders. One of that is to think about the calls that you guys are called out on. You could be called out to somebody who's actually thinking about suicide, who's communicating that desire, to calls where they may have just made an attempt, or to a call where they just a person had died by suicide. At that point, I think the first two, I would prefer that, because I think the third one, of course, is the roughest, because then you have family members to deal with. But then also knowing what those warning signs are for immediate risk for people that you're interacting with, because I know a lot of times first responders get called out, as do police, to situations that nobody else knows how to deal with, or they're harming themselves and they don't know what to do. And so having that ability to interact with them, how to respond appropriately, those things to say, to give them a little bit more support, to try to de-escalate the situation, and then know who to contact if you're needing help. So we've got stereotypes of a person with mental illness. These are the ones that are they're going to kind of be the things that kind of hold people back. Most of these are not true. They believe that they're always violent, they're paranoid, they all hear voices, they're unpredictable, they're evil, they're going to have nervous breakdowns, or they're bizarre. Depending on the circumstances and on the condition, they could be a little bizarre, they could be paranoid or hearing voices. Typically with people that are diagnosed with schizophrenia, they are no more dangerous to anyone in the public than anyone else. If they are going to be violent, it's going to be more likely towards family members. We have a lot of people that, the unpredictability, I think that gets tied up with the people that have bipolar disorder, because sometimes they can be very impulsive, and they can do some things that you may not expect, disrobing, saying things, and being more impulsive when it goes to even trying to move forward with a plan to harm themselves.
So if somebody says they are hearing voices, you can say, I believe that you are hearing them, Stephen, but I do not. Can you tell me what they're saying? And when we talk about suicide, we try to omit the word committed, because it implies a crime. we usually try to say they took their own life, they died by suicide, they passed away by their own hand. Use something that helps the survivors. When a person takes their life, more people are dying in the United States and in the state of Missouri by suicide than they are car wrecks, than they are homicide from drunk driving. And so that's why I get frustrated when I drive down I-44 when I have to go to Jefferson City for meetings. Sure, it's great that MoDOT puts up signs, that seatbelt looks good on you, windshields hurt, don't let your last text be something, or phones down, head up. Yeah, I like those kind of messaging, and that's important, but we're really not talking about the problem that more people are dying by suicide in the U.S. and in Missouri than they are from car crashes, drunk driving, and homicide. So it is real, and unfortunately, I have known people within my career that have worked in mental health, behavioral health, as well as law enforcement, and a first responder, because remember, I've been working since 1983, so it's been a very long time. But I have known professionals that have taken their own life. And so in your careers, you all are rushing in when other people are rushing out or trying to get away from the situation, hopefully. When we have first responders come, our goal of our staff is to listen to your directives, and it is your scene when you get on the scene. But stay calm. Try to give the person, if you can, a chance to calm down. Try to look at them with eye contact, but don't creepily stare into them. But also, I would not avoid eye contact. I would make some, particularly depending on what their nationality is. But Caucasians typically prefer a little more eye contact. Try to, if you can, noise or distractions. That's not always possible. Try to listen to what they're saying. Try to ask the person, what's been happening to you? Tell me what's been happening, because then you're not passing any judgment. You're kind of getting at the who, what, when, where, and what happened, how. It doesn't always work, but it's usually a good opener.
Yeah, we want to avoid asking why, because a lot of times when we ask why, it puts them on the defense. Because if you think about it, when you're a kid and your parent comes in, they're like, "Why did you do that?" Oh, okay. So we want to avoid that. Double check information by kind of restating what you hear. Let them know that it kind of lets them know that you're hearing them, especially if you can reword it in your own terms. Try to use their name as much as possible. Try to slow down instructions, giving as few as possible at a time, giving them time to work through it and comply. Because if they are having psychosis, they may have auditory hallucinations, and we don't even know how many other voices they might be hearing. So sometimes they may even try to take a step towards you or lean forward to try to make your voice louder than the others. Sometimes they will do that, and if you see that, I would even offer, would you like me to repeat what I asked you to do? Explain advantages of cooperating. I always try to put the most positive outcome first. So, if if I were talking to Debbie, I'd say, "Hey, Debbie, I would love to talk to you. Do you think we could sit down so we can talk a little bit more easily?" And then give her that opportunity.
So try to sandwich what your directive is, what you need to have happen, and then what you may have to do if they don't cooperate, and then again, the positive. I can help you better if you sit down, let's lay down on, I don't know what you call it, the cot, or, if you need to take them and you need to. I remember being called to one scene, and the mother was not wanting to leave because she had 3 sons who were in the car and they really needed her to go, and she was resisting that. So I know that it can happen. So important things to expect from a person that may be mentally disordered, confused thinking, they're not able to process. I mean, I don't know what you wanna call it, I'm not being disrespectful, I've devoted my entire life to working with people that have brain disorders, so, they can't process information. It's like driving your car with half quart of oil, it just doesn't work. They do not have the bandwidth to be able to sometimes process. They can be irrational, inappropriate, they can be laughing or crying when it's inappropriate, they can be rambling, and a big one is denial of obvious problems, when you can see that they have something going on, or physically in need of treatment. Morals, lowered inhibitions, it can be peculiar, poor hygiene for sure. And then also paranoia, they get fearful, get paranoid, and trauma. Want to cover that one?
Yeah, so with trauma, we have this that happens all the time. Trauma could be a physical experience, and it can also be related to behavioral health. Behavioral health type or psychological trauma is anything that's an event or a situation that is threatening or harmful, such as serious injury, sexual violence, threat of death, destruction of town or home by a natural means like a tornado. All of that goes into trauma, and trauma affects different people different ways, and it can affect people of any age, gender, ethnicity, race. I mean, it doesn't really matter who it is, particularly with children though. Children that experience trauma early on, it does change the way that their development progresses forward with their brain.
Well, and I go back to even after the Joplin tornado, there were some children that were toddlers that didn't have a lot of language skills, but little people generally take their cues from the big people in their life. And if your school was gone, your doctor's office, your church, your grocery store, your gas station, your swing set, your car, your house, nothing was familiar. So that was an extreme thing, but we are still seeing ramifications within our pediatric services of some children that didn't have language but picked up on what had happened. But direct trauma is when you witness it. I would venture to say that most of you see trauma of all sorts every shift or most shifts that you work. Secondary, a single event when someone is exposed through global events. Often we tell people that are disturbed by the hurricanes that have recently happened, some of the wars and conflicts going on, to shut off television, not to immerse themselves in that, to detach. And then the vicarious trauma, which is one that we take on. I believe for us, primary trauma and vicarious trauma, working in first responder and crisis roles at mental health, those two are the two that we can experience. And it can be after prolonged exposure, and you begin to change the way you view the world and hold some of your beliefs. So I tell people, whichever analogy you would like to use, when we show up to work, some days we're for a bucket of water, we're 100% full. We got some good rest, we've had a day or two off, we've had a good time with friends or family, we went motorcycle riding, skydiving, whatever your jam is, frisbee golf, you went fishing, whatever you did, or golf. And it was pretty good, and you come back at 100%, and then all day long people have their dipper in your bucket of water and they're dipping out water. And if you're on for several days, and your bucket goes dry, it's important to replenish it. Also, another thing I use is a piggy bank. Some days the trauma that I experience at the crisis center is a penny or a nickel for that day. Other days, if it's a really bad case, it could be $20 put in my piggy bank of trauma for that day. So it does have a layering effect and an accumulative effect. But before you say, oh, I don't know, Debbie, about that, because I've been doing that for a long time. Yes, we are all a different breed of people. My best friend is a trauma bay nurse in Corpus Christi, Texas. She says, Debbie, what does this say about us that you work in mental health crisis and I work in the trauma bay? And I said, I think it means we want to help people, number one. Number two, we're a little bit of adrenaline junkie. So a little bit of both can be true, but you can remediate it. That's the good news. We're going to get to that.
Yeah. So trauma causes stress, and so stress is not always a bad thing. Sometimes stress can be a good thing as part of life. An optimal amount of stress gives us the ability to meet deadlines, to do things. It's just our reaction on the demands and dangers that we see. It doesn't mean that it's always kind of a bad thing that we have to look at. Where we have to worry about is if we get into too much stress. This is where it starts causing problems. Because then it starts taking a toll on our mental and physical health, damaging our relationships. A lot of times we have a tendency to say things to our family, to our spouses that probably wouldn't say to other people because our family, they're with us, they love us, we know that it's a safe environment, so we sometimes spout things off that we shouldn't. Stress can also affect other health issues. Some of the symptoms of too much stress are the behavioral ways. You could have increased alcohol intake, tobacco use, neglecting your appearance or yourself, arguing with other people, snapping at people, kind of just wanting to zone out, watch TV, withdrawing from friends and family. You can overeat, undereat. It causes all those changes in your life.
So sometimes with our jobs come things that we cannot change. There are things that are just a part of it, and when we suit up and get in the game, it's a part of the job and we need to do it. But if we can't change it, try to at least put it in its proper place. Also, exercise control over what you can and take action. And I had a psychiatrist tell me years ago, do you know what's the difference between the patients in the inpatient psych ward and us, Debbie? And I said, no, please tell me, what's the difference? He said, they don't have any hobbies. They don't have any outlets for all of the things that have built up, and they really don't have anyone in their life that's supportive enough, that cares enough to say, hey, you need some help. So humor is good. We have gallows humor. Occasionally when we deal with law enforcement or EMS or even paramedics, we'll hear it. Please know that as long as it's in private, we're probably going to laugh too. So we have gallows humor as well, but if it becomes the only humor you have, call your friends or your coworkers out on that one. And then changing your mindset. It sounds really hokey, but if you can, for 21 days in a row, get up and think of 3 things you're grateful for. Doesn't matter what it is. 3 things. You do it for 21 days in a row, recircuit your brain.
And that rewiring is very powerful.
So do you hear negative self-talk? We all have it. We all do it to ourselves sometimes. We probably do it, it's called self-talk. But if you hear it in your own mind, try to navigate towards someone who usually is uplifting. We all, and even though it's my name, we all have a Debbie Downer. We do. We work with a lot of people, and when you're having a bad day, you probably don't want to have a break or maybe be with them as much. Gravitate to those that usually cheer you up and can bring you out of your negative. So try getting up on time, try keeping a schedule. Be sure when you experience a lot of physical exertion or a lot of mental exertion, or particularly both within the same shift, then you got to have an outlet. You need to get some physical activity, try to slow down. If there's something you do, here's what I know about my crisis responders, and I'm sure it's the same for EMS and firefighters and paramedics and people out in the field, first responders. We take care of the community. That's what we do. You guys save lives. You go and do that every day, every shift you work. You are do-gooders, you care about the community, you care about fellow human beings, and sometimes we overcommit ourselves in our personal lives as well. That we will volunteer for civic things or groups or to do extra things. If you're feeling a little cranky or irritable, try throttling back a little bit on that. Try to get sleep, whatever it is that helps you. Not everything works the same for everyone. Like, I've had some staff that I watch them do this weird, it's called like diamond artwork, and I'm sorry if I offend anyone that's doing it, but it looks so tedious that you glue these little shiny things on and it makes a picture. It looks really pretty when it's done, but I'm like,
Would not
oh
be
geez,
relaxing.
like, would not be relaxing for Stephen and I. I'm like, I'd be 5 into the blue and say, I'm done. Yeah, so whatever works for you, but remember, the mind and the body are the yin and the yang, and you need both operating pretty good most days. Deep breathing, try to avoid a bunch of alcohol, keep a journal. It can help you. I know it sounds hokey, but if you track how your mood is over time, sometimes you'll see a pattern. And
sometimes you need somebody else to tell you, because I know our spouses are pretty honest with us, and they're like, you are a bear, you need to go to the room, go to the bedroom, take a 5-minute cool down, and then you can come back. We want to find outlets, because we have to do that. Sometimes as first responders and even people in crisis, I think sometimes we take care of everybody else, and we do that, and we forget to take care of ourselves. And so it's okay to take care of yourselves and enjoy the things that you've got available to you.
so, I like some of these statements. They mean something, someone, even if one maybe mildly provokes you to think. Happiness is not a station that you arrive at, but a manner of traveling. Compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves. How far you go in life depends on you being tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, and tolerant of the weak, and strong, because someday in your life you will have been all of these. I truly believe that is true. And we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. You all are givers. You give to the community. I mean this sincerely. I feel comforted when I see the fire truck or the ambulance go by my office at 3rd and Virginia. That helps on the way. I also think and say a little prayer to myself. I hope that it goes well for the person who's needing your help. And then one of my favorites, it is one of the most beautiful compensations of this life that no man can sincerely try to help another without helping himself. And to get through the hardest journey, we need to only take one step at a time, but we must keep on stepping. And I believe that is true in our careers. And we are going to close with a video, and I hope it works. It's a little over 10 minutes, and then we'll leave a few minutes for questions so we can end in a timely manner for those that are attending. So I sure hope the video works.
Let's try this.
It's by Sean.
Is your volume going through the computer or through?
I don't know.
A few minutes for questions so we can end in a timely manner for those that are attending. Is it gonna play?
Let's see if it plays on our side.
Okay.
I'm seeing it.
Where's
It's playing.
the
Just need
audio?
to fix the volume. Is it coming out of your computer speakers?
Hold on, it's on my computer speaker right now, but it's going through this.
That's still them talking. It hasn't caught up yet. Okay.
So does the audio?
Hold on just a minute. Let me see. No, it's not.
I'm going to switch it to that.
Not sure if we can make that happen or not.
It is the best part of the presentation, I think. But about why we're getting this up and going. You can ask questions, but the Ozark Crisis Team covers Barton, Jasper, Newton, and McDonald counties. We have crisis specialists on the phone 24/7. We have a mobile crisis response that can go out and meet you at the scene if the scene's been cleared and you need to leave and you believe the person is mentally disordered. We definitely will come to the scene. We do not charge to do that. And we have mental health professionals who can do assessments. And so I think our service is underutilized. So we have capacity to be able to help.
They said earning a degree would keep me in demand, but some degrees are more valuable than others.
That's true.
So, okay, I don't think I got that fixed. We'll have to, maybe get back to the full screen.
Okay.
Hold on just a minute. Is that sound? It might be coming from up high. That's what I was hoping for. I hear sound, but I don't know where it's coming from.
Just for you. Customize every element of your website and watch your vision come to life.
When I was 7 years old, and my sister.
Let's see if it'll come through on presentation mode.
What we need to do is get that link and add it to your channel. YouTube may block that,
Every single time I do a mural, every single time I do a piece,
but we'll add the link. Add the link in there so they can click on it on their own.
But then my sister at the time, I mean, I'm 2 years older than her now, but at the time that meant she had to do everything that I wanted to do, and I wanted to play war. So we were up on top of our bunk beds, and on one side of the bunk bed I had put out all my G.I. Joe soldiers and weaponry, and on the other side were all my sister's Milos and ponies and ready for a cavalry charge. There are differing accounts of what actually happened that afternoon, but since my sister is not here with us today, let me tell you the true story. Which is my sister is a little bit on the clumsy side, and somehow, without any help or push from her older brother at all, suddenly Amy disappeared off the top of the bunk bed and landed with us crashed on the floor. And I nervously peered over the side of the bed to see what had befallen my fallen sister, and saw that she had landed painfully on her hands and knees on all fours on the ground. I was nervous because my parents had charged me with making sure that my sister and I played as safely and as quietly as possible. And seeing as how I had accidentally broken Amy's arm just 1 week before, heroically pushing her out of the way of an oncoming imaginary sniper bullet.
every single time I do a mural, every single time I do a piece, it's about inclusion.
For which I have yet to be thanked. I was trying as hard as I could. She didn't even see it coming. I was trying as hard as I could to be on my best behavior, and I saw my sister's face this wail of pain and suffering and surprise, threatening to erupt from her mouth and threatening to wake my parents from the long winter's nap for which they had settled. So I did the only thing my little frantic 7-year-old brain could think to do to avert this tragedy. If you have children, you've seen this hundreds of times before. I said, Amy, wait, don't cry, don't cry. Did you see how you landed? No human lands on all fours like that. Amy, I think this means you're a unicorn. Now that was cheating, because there's nothing in the world my sister would want more than not to be Amy the hurt 5-year-old little sister, but Amy the special unicorn. Of course, this was an option that was open to her brain at no point in the past. And you could see on my poor, manipulated sister's face conflict. As her little brain attempted to devote resources to feeling the pain and suffering and surprise she just experienced, or contemplating her newfound identity as a unicorn. And the latter won out. Instead of crying, instead of ceasing our play, instead of waking my parents with all the negative consequences that would have ensued for me, instead, a smile spread across her face, and she scrambled right back up onto the bunk bed with all the grace of a baby unicorn. With one broken leg. What we stumbled across at this tender age of just 5 and 7, we had no idea at the time, was something that was going to be at the vanguard of a scientific revolution occurring 2 decades later in the way that we look at the human brain. What we had stumbled across is something called positive psychology, which is the reason that I'm here today and the reason that I wake up every morning. When I first started talking about this research outside of academia, out with companies and schools, the very first thing they said to never do is to start your talk with a graph. The very first thing I wanted to do is start my talk with a graph. This graph looks boring, but this graph is the reason that I get excited and wake up every morning. And this graph doesn't even mean anything, it's fake data. What we found is, if I got this data back sitting you here in the room, I would be thrilled, because there's very clearly a trend that's going on there, and that means that I can get published, which is all that really matters. The fact that there's one weird red dot that's up above the curve, there's one weird in the room, you know who you are, I saw you earlier. That's no problem. That's no problem, as most of you know, because I can just delete that dot. I can delete that dot because that's clearly a measurement error, and we know that's a measurement error because it's messing up my data. So one of the very first things that we teach people in economics and statistics and business and psychology courses is how, in a statistically valid way, do we eliminate the weirdos? How do we eliminate the outliers? So that we can find the line of best fit, which is fantastic if I'm trying to find out how many Advil the average person should be taking, too. But if I'm interested in potential, if I'm interested in your potential, or for happiness, or productivity, or energy, or creativity, what we're doing is we're creating the cult of the average with science. If I ask a question like, how fast can a child learn how to read in a classroom? Scientists change the answer to, how fast does the average child learn how to read in that classroom? And then we tailor the class right towards the average. Now, if you fall below the average on this curve, then psychologists get thrilled, because that means you're either depressed, or you have a disorder, or hopefully both. We're hoping for both, because our business model is if you come into a therapy session with one problem, we want to make sure you leave knowing you have 10. So you'll keep coming back over and over again. We'll go back into your childhood if necessary, but eventually what we want to do is to make you normal again. But normal is merely average. And what I posit, and what positive psychology posits, is that if we study what is merely average, we will remain merely average. That instead of deleting those positive outliers, what I intentionally do is come into a population like this one and says, why? Why is it that some of you are so high above the curve in terms of your intellectual ability, athletic ability, musical ability, creativity, energy levels, your resiliency in the face of challenge, your sense of humor? Whatever it is, instead of deleting you, what I want to do is study you. Because maybe we can glean information, not just how to move people up to the average, but how we can move the entire average up at our companies and schools worldwide. The reason this graph is important to me is when I turn on the news, it seems like the majority of the information is not positive. In fact, it's negative. Most of it's about murder, corruption, diseases, natural disasters, and very quickly, my brain starts to think that's the accurate ratio of negative to positive in the world. What that's doing is creating something called the medical school syndrome, which, if you know people who have been to medical school during the first year of medical training, as you read through a list of all the symptoms and diseases that could happen, suddenly you realize you have all of them. I have a brother-in-law named Bobo, which is a whole other story. Bobo married Amy the unicorn. Bobo called me on the phone from Yale Medical School. And Bobo said, Sean, I have leprosy. Which even at Yale is extraordinarily rare. But I had no idea how to console poor Bobo because he had just gotten over an entire week of menopause.
Some people believe that the future is already written. This is dedicated to those who take fate into their own hands.
See, what we're finding is not necessarily the reality that shapes us, but the lens through which your brain views the world that shapes your reality. If we can change the lens, not only can we change your happiness, we can change every single educational and business outcome at the same time. When I applied to Harvard, I applied on a dare. I didn't expect to get in, and my family had no money for college. When I got a military scholarship 2 weeks later that allowed me to go, suddenly something that wasn't even a possibility became a reality. When I went there, I assumed everyone else would see it as a privilege as well, that they'd be excited to be there. Even if you're in a classroom full of people smarter than you, you'd be happy just to be in that classroom, which is what I felt. But what I found there is while some people experienced that, when I graduated after my 4 years and then spent the next 8 years living in the dorms with the students, Harvard asked me to. Wasn't that guy. But what happened, I was an officer of Harvard to counsel students through the difficult 4 years, and what I found in my research and my teaching is that these students, no matter how happy they were with their original success of getting into the school, 2 weeks later their brains were focused not on the privilege of being there, nor on their philosophy or their physics. Their brains focused on the competition, the workload, the hassles, the stresses, the complaints. When I first went in there, I walked into the freshman dining hall, which is where my friends from Waco, Texas, which is where I grew up. I know some of you have heard of it. When they come to visit me, they look around, they say, this freshman dining hall looks like something off Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, which it does. This is Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, and that's Harvard. And when they see this, they say, Sean, why do you waste your time studying happiness at Harvard? Seriously, what does a Harvard student possibly have to be unhappy about? Embedded within that question is the key to understanding the science of happiness. Because what that question assumes is that our external world is predictive of our happiness levels, when in reality, If I know everything about your external world, I can only predict 10% of your long-term happiness. 90% of your long-term happiness is predicted not by the external world, but by the way your brain processes the world. And if we change it, if we change our formula for happiness and success, what we can do is change the way that we can then affect reality. What we found is that only 75% of job successes, only 25% of job successes are predicted by IQ. 75% of job successes are predicted by your optimism levels, your social support, and your ability to see stress as a challenge instead of as a threat. I talked to a boarding school up in New England, probably the most prestigious boarding school, and they said, we already know that. So every year, instead of just teaching our students, we also have a wellness week, and we're so excited. Monday night, we have the world's leading expert coming in to speak about adolescent depression. Tuesday night is school violence and bullying. Wednesday night is eating disorders. Thursday night is illicit drug use. And Friday night, we're trying to decide between risky sex or happiness. I said that's most people's Friday nights.
Some people believe that their future is already written. This is dedicated to those who take fate into their own hands.
Let's get those made up.
Which I'm glad you liked, but they did not like that at all. Silence on the phone. And into the silence, I said, I'd be happy to speak to your school, but just so you know, that's not a wellness week, that's a sickness week. What you've done is you've outlined all the negative things that can happen, but not talked about the positive. The absence of disease is not health. Here's how we get to health. We need to reverse the formula for happiness and success. In the past 3 years, I've traveled to 45 different countries, working with schools and companies in the midst of an economic downturn. And what I found is that most companies and schools follow a formula for success, which is this: if I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. That undergirds most of our parenting styles, our managing styles, the way that we motivate our behavior. And the problem is, it's scientifically broken and backwards for 2 reasons. First, every time your brain has a success, you just change the goalpost of what success looked like. You got good grades, now you have to get better grades. You got into a good school, now you have to get a better school. You got a good job, now you have to get a better job. You hit your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. And if happiness is on the opposite side of success, your brain never gets there. What we've done is we've pushed happiness over the cognitive horizon as a society. And that's because we think we have to be successful, then we'll be happier. But the real problem is our brains work in the opposite order. If you can raise somebody's level of positivity in the present, then their brain experiences what we now call a happiness advantage, which is your brain at positive performs significantly better than it does at negative, neutral, or stressed. Your intelligence rises, your creativity rises, your energy levels rise. In fact, what we found is that every single business outcome improves. Your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. You're 37% better at sales. Doctors are 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis when positive instead of negative, neutral, or stress, which means we can reverse the formula. If we can find a way of becoming positive in the present, then our brains work even more successfully, as we're able to work harder, faster, and more intelligently. What we need to be able to do is to reverse this formula so we can start to see what our brains are actually capable of. Because dopamine, which floods into your system when you're positive, has 2 functions. Not only does it make you happier, it turns on all the learning centers in your brain, allowing you to adapt to the world in a different way. We found that there are ways you can train your brain to be able to become more positive. In just a 2-minute span of time, done for 21 days in a row, we can actually rewire your brain, allowing your brain to actually work more optimistically and more successfully. We've done these things in research now in every single company that I've worked with, getting them to write down 3 new things that they're grateful for 21 days in a row, 3 new things each day. And at the end of that, their brain starts to retain a pattern of scanning the world not for the negative, but for the positive first. Journaling about 1 positive experience you've had over the past 24 hours allows your brain to relive it. Exercise teaches your brain that your behavior matters. We find that meditation allows your brain to get over the cultural ADHD that we've been creating by trying to do multiple tasks at once, and allows our brains to focus on the task at hand. And finally, random acts of kindness or conscious acts of kindness. We get people, when they open up their inbox, to write 1 positive email, praising or thanking somebody in their social support network. And by doing these activities, and by training your brain, just like we train our bodies, what we found is we can reverse the formula for happiness and success, and in doing so, not only create ripples of positivity, but create a real revolution. Thank you very much.
So, resources, if you're in the field, you need help, call 988 or the Ozark crisis number. We do have our urgent behavioral solutions behind Freeman Urgent Care, and the crisis team is at 305 Virginia, right next to the police department. There are no charge to be seen at either location. However, to go to urgent behavioral solutions, you do have to be ages 16 and above. The crisis team, 24 hours a day, mobile crisis. And Stephen and I presented some of the negative impacts that our career choices can do to our bodies over time. But I am of the philosophy, the new way of thinking is the positivity, to positivity and retrain our brains. Because the absence of a disorder or sickness is not equal wellness. So hopefully that gives you a little taste of a lot of information. We'd be happy to do any crisis debriefings. If somebody wants to call and talk anonymously to us, we're happy to talk to you. If you have a really bad shift or a bad day, or you want to come in and talk, or if we need to come and do a crisis debriefing, we do those. They're free, they're confidential. We do them for banks, industries, emergency rooms, clergy, you name it, we go. So, questions?
They are getting a few no's and thank yous at the moment.
Check into the positivity though. I know it sounds a little foreign, but we started it at Crisis, and if you want to talk about a lot of skeptics, try training people or retraining people who've worked in mental health for 10 or 20 or 30 years. Woo! I had a rough audience with my counselors and social workers.
Yes.
But we started a gratitude board, and at first it was kind of pathetic, and now it is completely filled. And it is filled once a week, and I think it has changed our level of burnout. So it's worth a try.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't see any questions yet, just a bunch of thank yous.
Lots of thank
Oh,
yous.
awesome.
Awesome.
Hope it was helpful. It's a lot of content, but feel free to digest it. If you have a question, we're always there. Stephen and Debbie will be happy to help. And if you do not receive the type of care service you thought you should have received, then we also want to hear about that as leaders.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're gonna